Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Brian Geary. On behalf of the Writers Education Committee, fellow co-chair Hilliard Guess, Vice Chair Cynthia Riddle, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's panel, Civic Storylines, Creating Change Through Our Characters. Tonight's event is also co-sponsored by the Civic Leadership Stories Project. We at the Writers Education Committee have a fairly simple mandate: provide tips and tricks and insight for this ever-evolving business, this changing business, this crazy business of writing for film and television. We meet every month. You can look inside the calendar and you can see the date that we're going to meet. You can RSVP to join us. And if you would like to participate in an event like this evening, or you may have an idea for an event like this evening, well, you can come join us at the Writers Education Committee and help us put together another panel full of tips and tricks and insight just like this one. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Jo Brick, whose idea this entire panel was this evening to put this together. So it's no coincidence that Kelly Jo is also going to be this evening's moderator. So Kelly Jo, I'm going to hand this over to you for this evening to moderate and host. And again, thank you all for attending. Panelists, thank you for joining us for this conversation, and have a wonderful talk. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Brian. I'd like to get started by introducing our panelists who are joining us here tonight. You can see deeper into their bios in the program for tonight. And first we have from the Civic Leadership Stories Project, both Will Jenkins and Charmion Kinder. We're so fortunate to have Cincinnati City Council member to bring his viewpoints, Reggie Harris. Thanks, Reggie. And writers from two shows that I absolutely adore. I'm so happy and excited that they're here with us tonight. Kay Oyegun and Nastaran Dibai. So thank you so much for being part of our event. And I want to start out with this little fact. Only about a quarter of Americans say that they trust the government in Washington, D.C., and only half believe that ordinary people can do a lot to influence the government. So how can we as writers make a difference? Well, TV and film it's an escape, it's entertainment, but it can also be an educator. While many of us feel our hands are tied and we're at a loss for what we can do, we're storytellers. And that's what tonight is about. It's creating change through our characters. And I'd like to get us started with a brief presentation from Will and Charmion about the Civic Leadership Stories Project. So take it away.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna share my screen real quick and we'll run through this presentation. So this is Civic Leadership Stories Project. We'll tell you a little bit what we're doing and really look forward to having this conversation today. Charmion, would you like to start off?
Absolutely. And so excited, first of all, to have you all here. And know we'll learn in the chat where you are residing, where you are writing from, where your brilliance comes from, who you are. But we are just excited to come to you today to talk a little bit more about the intersection between policy, politics, and then entertainment. And so really one of the first things that we want to kick off with is understanding and pointing out, that we have a civic leadership crisis, right? At a time when it's most urgently needed, because we all have survived the COVID-19 pandemic. We all have been through really great leadership and really poor leadership, no matter what political affiliation that you align with. We know that good leaders are hard to find. The people that connect with us at home, the ones that really understand what's going on with us in our houses don't seem to be really voting on our issues right now. We also know that most people don't know how to turn things around. They feel helpless. There is this us and them syndrome. There is this I'm at home working and there are these people in DC who are voting on my life syndrome. And so one of the things we have to figure out is, what are we going to do about that? And so we want to ask, who will step up? And we have to source those individuals. We have to inspire them. We have to tell them excellent stories. And so we know that there are crises that are happening in healthcare, in migration, in economy, in justice, in education, climate, in voting, more specifically, Ukraine and Russia currently. And we know that we have geopolitical challenges that we need to deal with and understand. And so one of the things we want to do is really start to make sure that we are taking this conversation out of just the DC Beltway space and actually talking to everyday Americans about their opportunity, responsibility, and really touch points that they may have to engage in the civic leadership process. So one question we have is, who are the civic leaders in the stories that you are writing? And really trying to break barriers a little bit on what we typically think they look like. Sometimes we think it's the president, sometimes we think it's the senator, but we are coming to you today really sort of to expand a conversation around what civic leadership in your stories looks like. So they are school board members, they are government scientists and polling officials, they are public providers, public care providers, and also social service administrators who make multiple decisions on what happens on the ground in your zip code. And one of the things we want to do is dispel what a civic leader looks like today.
Yeah, so we've got this chart we put together, again, just to help imagine all the different types of characters who could be civic leaders. So this first column is the one that people often think of. The second one, we do see a lot of stories around military and law enforcement, and that's really a whole separate section. There are a lot of folks that are doing interesting research and work on that. But then the rest of the way through, all these other areas where people could be civic leaders at the national level, at the state level, the local level, folks who are working in infrastructure, in water safety, the environment, educators, as well as local government. All of these folks are civic leaders. And so we wanted to find out what stories are being told about civic leaders, democracy, voting. And so the Center for Media and Social Impact, which we're part of, and we partnered with MTV and When We All Vote to do a study of more than 600 episodes of both scripted and unscripted entertainment in 2020, which is a year when people were thinking a lot about politics. And we encourage you all to take a look at this study. We're just going to skim through really quickly some of the big findings from it. I'll throw that back to you, Charmion.
Absolutely. So, and we know that any civic themes or, talking, taking action are in half of current shows. So when we're talking about characters or subjects that engage in conversations or actions, they span a number of different genres, from scripted to drama or comedy. But a lot of times it's unscripted. It's not intentional. We're not thinking about the development of the character or how they are showing up. And so we know that these themes are really important, and we know that they have to pull through in what we're writing in order to actually influence the American electorate.
So an interesting thing we found was that characters were 3 times more likely to be shown talking about civic themes and politics than actually doing anything about it. And so that shows there's definitely a lot of interest or lots of opportunities for these topics to come up. And there are lots of opportunities to actually show what people do, show how people can make a difference, how people can try to make change. We also found that voting, and again, this is in 2020, storylines or depictions of voting only showed up in about 1% of the programming we saw. And so we think there's a lot of opportunity in the years ahead to have more depictions of voting too.
We also found a big finding in our third point is that civic leaders are twice as likely to be shown engaging in illegal activities and activities that are really shown as corrupt in policymaking, right? Not the positives. Why would you get into civic participation? Why would you serve people? Why would you even, route your life to make sure that other people are civically engaged? And so the depictions currently are all negative. So when people are thinking about voting or participating in the process, they are leveraging what they're learning from entertainment to inform their voting behaviors. We found that when civic leaders, when shown, are much more likely to be white, 78% white, in fact, than identify as men or, people of color, which is a little bit less, which is a 68% percentile. We know that entertainment is getting a lot better with representation, much, much better. But we also know that there's still a skewed perspective of who can run the country, how they run the country, and who can participate.
Yeah. So why do civic storylines matter? And I'm sure many of you all know this, but there's a lot of research that shows that audiences, people rely on entertainment shows and films for information and opinions. And that includes information and opinions about politics, government, voting, and civic leadership.
Some of the old stories and myths about civic leaders show up all over the place. These old stories are kind of harmful, right? Because if I'm a young Black woman sitting in New Haven, Connecticut, or even DC, and thinking about my participation in the political process, a lot of times I just defer to all of the images that have been given to me, for the past 40 years of my life. And so we know that these old stories are harmful for people's ability to connect with their futures. We know that communities start to believe they can only exist in the paradigm that they see every day. And we want to make sure that we are going from older stories to newer stories, to fresh stories, to themes that encourage and inspire people to actually participate. So we know here with the old stories, we have from the screen to the street, viewers can actually learn anti-democratic messages from fictional media. And we saw that happen really with January 6th, right, with the insurrection. With a lot of people showing up from things that they had seen in media and believing these things so deeply that they actually felt like they wanted to act upon them. And so we want to make sure that we're intentional about that.
So on the other hand, we've also seen on a lot of different other issues how entertainment media storylines can go beyond old stories and imagine new stories for many real life issues. One example, I worked at Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., worked on mental health. And we worked with a lot of storytellers and shows who were trying to show new views about people with mental illness or people with addiction, that those storylines didn't have to always end in violence or death, that there were many other storylines that could be told, entertaining storylines, inspiring storylines about treatment, recovery, and the future. And so that approach is something that really inspired what we're trying to do with the Civic Leadership Stories Project, as we look at stories that could be told about what's wrong with democracy and failures, which are certainly real and there's certainly challenges, but there also are so many opportunities for stories about civic leaders who are out there, and we'll be talking about this more today, but civic leaders who are breaking stereotypes and barriers, who are challenging unjust and broken systems. And then after that, building healthy, inclusive communities. And that's something we really think storytellers can help us imagine. What does this look like? Because when you're stuck, a number of us here have worked inside government, when you're stuck in the system, just trying to survive day to day, it can be hard to imagine how things can be different. And we think there's so many opportunities to tell new stories about what things can look like. And again, these aren't just for political shows, but really any show that's about people and communities. There are always going to be people who are in leadership, community, groups of people who are taking responsibility for things. And those are the kinds of stories that we want to support. So we're going to wrap up real quick, but just with a couple of resources that we have for storytellers to help in this.
Absolutely. And so we, as Will mentioned, we have real life people on the phone that are going to speak to this and their lived experience and their experience with participating in running and governance, right? But we have something called the Civic Solutions Stories Library, where you can find stories across a number of states. So if you are writing in a specific genre or a specific region or to a specific demographic, there are a number of different stories that have been compiled in this library that can help you really get to the core, the origin story of the people in that demographic, of the leaders in that demographic, how they are governing, what they are doing to produce solutions, and how they are solving problems. We know that in our storylines, we've seen a lot about what's wrong and what's corrupt about the system, but we believe there is a prime opportunity to start talking about people who are doing things that are right. They're waking up every day and figuring out how to solve for challenges in their communities on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of those stories are harnessed in this library. And so we're really excited about that opportunity as we bridge with you all who are writing these themes and scripts for entertainment.
Yeah, and we also through our partner organizations like the New Leaders Council that both Reggie and I are part of. We have networks of civic leaders all over the country who are taking leadership in different ways, and we are bringing their experiences to storytellers, again, to spark new ideas, to give feedback, to help inspire new storylines and ways of solving problems.
So we know we got to put our mouth where our money, where our mouth is. And we're talking about this, we're saying do this, but we also have opportunities and resources to be of assistance. So there are presentations and workshops where our experts can help creators discover civic leader character types, common stereotypes of public service and help to dispel those, uncommon entertaining storyline ideas, and really dig in and lock arms and dig in with you on, yes, we have to have a compelling and a challenging storyline and characters and people who tell the truth, but there has to be a silver lining within this in order to make sure that when we deliver stories to the American electorate and population, that they do see opportunities for themselves to fit into solutions.
Yeah, and so we think these new storylines can inspire audiences to get involved with voting, advocacy, and public service. And the one message I think we want to help folks walk away from is there's just so many unexpected, inspiring, entertaining stories about this new generation of civic leaders around the country just waiting to be told. So Kelly Jo, turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that and really sharing what kind of difference like our stories and characters can be making out there. And for everyone in attendance on the program, there's also links to those resources. So you can click into that and find out more about the story library and consultations and things like that. So let's dig right in. Start out with Kay and Nastaran. We have both comedy and drama represented here tonight, and shows out there like Madam Secretary versus something like Abbott Elementary, they take very different looks at leadership, just like This Is Us and Resident Alien do. But all these ways of showing leadership are engaging with the stories and the characters. So for the writers, can you tell us how having a character who embraces leadership can be a foundation for both humor and drama? Like, what's the flexibility you get with a character like this? And are there any constraints? If we'd start with Kay.
Gosh, I told Will when we had a conversation, hi everyone, hello. When Will sort of reached out, I'm shocked to be on this panel. I would never have considered This Is Us a show that showed civic leadership, but that's awesome. I shared that with my coworkers and they also found it hilarious and very awesome. But it was never, the character, Randall Pearson, played by Sterling K. Brown, became a politician. It was something that was character driven. It was something that was born out of a deep desire to be a hero of sorts to his community and to his people. We sort of worked through a lot of emotional layers with the character that dealt with a hero complex. And so one of the things that we consider political leaders, a lot of ways, are heroes. And so for a character who felt like he was isolated from his community, what better way for him to, as an adult male taking agency of his life, to actually go and represent that community. So it was sort of our way of answering a core character character question. We're not a political show. We were not looking to have political conversations necessarily, but we wanted to find a way for this particular character to achieve his internal drives. And that felt like politics was the way to go about it. We did an election storyline. We did, you know, him on the day-to-day job storylines and all of that. And then like teased him becoming president towards the end of the run of the show. But all of those things were all done again to sort of answer personal questions that he was having. It was the third rail in our show in a lot of ways, because no one, it was politically inclined on staff. We had one of our writers who previously wrote on West Wing, Kevin Falls. And so he was the one who would get so excited when we were talking about politics, and everyone else's eyes would glaze over. So bless Kevin, but he knew that like maybe we shouldn't go too far in to that. So we always had political storylines that were very character driven. So at the very least, if Randall cared about it and it was affecting his family, then the audience might care about it as well. So that's the way we went about it.
Excellent.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel the same way as you. I'm like, oh, we're not a political show. I mean, I worked on a show that I feel like was way more political, which was Dear White People, and we really went for it there. But on Resident Alien, which is the show I currently work on, I never really looked at it that way. Although I think the entire show, you know, we have like law enforcement, and we have a mayor, and we have the mayor's wife who is a teacher, and it was all about like this like small community in Colorado. But really our way of sort of looking at the world was through the eyes of this alien who crash lands there. And so like he comes with a mission to destroy humanity, because his mission is by destroying humanity, he can save Earth, because we're consuming all of Earth's resources, right? So I think our show is more, I consider it more of an environmental show. But and then throughout the series, he becomes more in touch with his humanity, or begins to understand humanity. And so, you know, that's how we tell our stories. I am actually a political junkie, so I wish we had more storylines where our characters are going out to vote and stuff, but it's just not because of, and we may get there at some point, but for now it's more the arc of this alien sort of like learning about humanity as he observes the people around him, and the characters that we have like Sheriff Mike, or Mayor Ben, or his wife who's a teacher, is, you know, we use them differently than you guys do, in that we use them mostly for comic relief, you know, but they definitely, I mean, I think when you watch the show, you get a sense of like, there's a community there, and they very much care about where they are. And unfortunately, there is actually a storyline we have that is in the second half of this second season that just started, that is all about building a resort and what that'll do to the town. And I don't want to give everything away, because there is a whole like storyline about it, but it was all about like the community getting together, and there's literally people who are for it, there's people against it. We talk about what are the advantages, why somebody wants it, why somebody doesn't want it, and without giving the season away, I think that I think is a storyline that, you know, speaks more to what we're talking about here tonight.
Well, and both shows just it's that leadership aspect, not necessarily, with these stories, we don't need to get political, but we're showing that Somebody who's a mayor of a town can make a difference in trying to bring a resort in, or we can see, I mean, This Is Us did it so well in just with the little tease of deep fried Oreos. And that's like sparks the fact that he's looking at a presidential run. So there's so many different levels and layers that you can bring into the story with looking at leadership. So thank you. Reggie, the Civic Storyline study also found a big point about representation, which has found that the vast majority of civic leaders portrayed on screen are white males. Both This Is Us and Resident Alien are showing new voices in leadership with people of color and women. And we hear a lot about a new generation in leadership and people breaking boundaries. Reggie, you're breaking boundaries yourself. And what are you seeing out there when it comes to community leadership? What's the energy? Who are these new voices wanting to make a difference that we really should be aware of so we can bring authenticity into our stories?
Thank you for that question, Kelly. And I'm going to do a very politician thing, and I'm going to actually do a pivot because I want to address something in the writer's comment that I think is relevant, and I'll circle back to it. In this conversation, I feel like when we say political, we are making it synonymous with partisanship. And I think political and being partisan are two very different things. And Kay, in fact, most people who say that they are not political are actually the most political people. And so often what I say to folks is that, like, you know, have you ever like tailored your message to a particular audience in order to impact the outcome of a decision, right? Like if you ever say like, I'm gonna say it this way to this person so that they hear it, that's politics, right? Do you feel like, do you weigh the impacts of your actions on the short term and long term? So if I say this, or if I do this, or if I take this job, it might have a boom to my career in the short term, but in the long term, that's politics. Like, you know, do you ever struggle with like your allegiance or your identity or your values and how that may impact a decision that you make? That's politics. That's literally the framework for how, you know, I decide whether or not I'm going to vote in favor of funding another police class, or how I decide whether or not we're going to, you know, hire 2 more urban planners in our planning department, right? So like, I kind of just wanted to like sort of lift this up, that I think is important to distinguish between politics and partisanship when we talk about these stories. And the reason why that's important is because from a leadership perspective, right, leaders show up in all types of ways. And being an elected official really first and foremost is about relationship building and leveraging of relationships, and learning how to be transactional in relationships that serve the common good. And so what we are seeing is that, and it's with the help of media. So like, I'm gonna mess up her name, but bless it because I love her. I think it's Elaine Wederick. I mean, wasn't she the former Teen Vogue editor? And what she did with Teen Vogue and how she just changed what?
Elaine Welteroth.
Yes.
I know her because I adapted her book with her, so that's why she's great.
Thank you for the correct pronunciation of her name. But what that did is that it just opened up this whole new way of thinking, like who gets to write about politics, who gets to talk about what publications get to weigh in on presidential elections. And once we start to challenge those norms, then we start to challenge them in more traditional settings. So who gets to be a city council member? Who gets to chair, as I do, the Equitable Growth and Housing Committee, the first housing committee in the city of Cincinnati, right? First openly gay Black man elected to the city of Cincinnati City Council, married, interracially married, former professional ballet dancer turned social worker, right? These are all narratives that are not traditional political narratives. And yet, in fact, I have been working in politics my entire career because every decision I make is about relationships and transactions, and how do I leverage authentic relationships to achieve a goal, you know? but it just looks differently with different identities. So.
Okay.
Just to throw in there, I love that. This Is Us was a wildly left Democratic show. So partisan wise, we picked our side. However, I think my definition of political was just sort of like, I feel like every time we did anything about voting or process or anything, we just did it like voting for babies. So that's what I meant by political. Everything was real Wikipedia like focus. So therein lies the definition of that. But we were deeply partisan.
Yeah.
Well, all right. And this question is really for anyone who wants to dive in. Is civic leadership, as we're talking here, it doesn't always mean like government or civil servants. It can be community leaders and those who are excluded from positions in government, like the undocumented, parolees who can't vote, homeless citizens, anyone who feels disenfranchised. What kind of leadership stories should we be telling right now that are reflecting true civic life in America?
Gosh, I mean, I think part of why I'm just sort of like in awe of it is just there's so many stories that are being told. I just started watching the show on Netflix called Mo. It's about an asylum seeker on Netflix. Like it's Netflix. He's been seeking asylum for the last 20 years, but he was basically growing up here in the States. And so he like kept on missing his asylum interview. It's a comedy. It's with this I think he's a Israeli or Pakistani a comedian. And so it's like literally the whole show was about this community that is essentially here. And they're a group of asylum seekers that another one on Hulu called Fool is about a group of it's just sort of like, it is consistently out there. The show, The Cleaning Lady, I have never on Fox, I've never seen such a clear depiction of what it actually means to have an ICE raid, what the actual process of getting citizenship in this country looks like. There are stories that are actively, bombastically, unapologetically saying what they need to say in a way that is so thrilling and so awesome to witness. But it's one of those things where it's sort of, I can't turn on the TV right now without seeing something that is advocating something. In a way that, I mean, P-Valley just did a whole story, not only about domestic violence, but also about abortion rights. Like, it's just sort of like, I mean, maybe I need to watch some different stuff, but it's just like, it's everywhere. So it's just sort of like, I'm excited. And I'm also just sort of like, oh, it's happening. Like, it's really, and none of these people that I just said out loud are white or male. So it's just sort of like, so it's people doing stuff. We rocking it. I'm pitching a thing right now where it's sort of like they're politically engaged and they're all Black and brown women. So it's just sort of like, I'm thrilled about the fact that it doesn't feel like, I'm thrilled that it feels like there's so much engagement and movement, and the storytellers that are getting to put their stuff on screen and we're getting to receive them, should we choose to, are looking and sounding differently and are telling very personal stories and are unapologetic about it. But that's just a shout out for watch Fool and watch Mo, watch P-Valley. It's just, the list goes on.
Kay, I am plus wanting everything you're saying, and I don't know if it's my turn to talk, Kelly Jo, but
go for it.
Even with P-Valley, for example, to your great point, we're in a large conversation about abortion rights around the country, LGBTQIA community. And our premise, I think, and what you all are saying and what we are saying is, I think gone are the days where power comes from the center or power comes from DC and dictates to everyone, vote for this and this is how the world works. There is so much power in entertainment to inform the American electorate about what really happens with human beings in the United States of America and around the world. What it means to be in a same-sex loving relationship, what it means to be someone who has to support her family through any means necessary, right? And to humanize these individuals, because these are what comprises America. These are the human beings that are living through issues. And so the more that we understand what each other is going through, the better we can understand why it's important for us to participate in a process to do something either positively about it or whatever we feel, but we can't feel until we see it on screen, till we understand that person that we may have never met, till we understand that story well articulated. And I think the beautiful thing about the Civic Leadership Project is that we understand that very clearly. That the center of power is not necessarily in DC. The center of power is these types of conversations that we're having this evening across, that uncovers really what's happening in our country. How do we leverage all the platforms that we have to more authentically tell these stories? And then how do we reverse engineer people caring about their stake in that story, right? And so that is the beautiful thing about this, is really just having an expanded conversation, even from the political realm, of how do we effectively organize the country. And it's not just from asking people to vote. It's from understanding our humanity around the country and around the world. Yeah. And that happens mostly from the story that everyone on this phone is an expert in telling.
And I wanted to put a fine point on both of those two comments, and just sort of really advocate for how we talk about local politics, and particularly mayors, cities, commissioners, because you're like, local politics really has a huge impact on people's lives, right? The ability I have as a council member to dramatically impact my neighbors' lives is pretty great. And every day I kind of wake up kind of in awe of like, oh wow, I get to make this decision. Or, you know, I'm one of 9 people, but you know, I've worked my way into such I can influence other folks make these decisions. And you know, what we've done is that we've at least from my perspective, in a Western sort of narrative, we've really dug in deep on certain departments. So we got a million shows about the police department, right? But like, I approve the police department's budget, right? And that's a whole other thing that has a whole set of drama. You know, like, we approve the fire department's budget. You know, there's a national housing crisis, right? Like housing is a thing that everyone's like housing. Like, it is the zoning laws that your particular city passes. It is the capital dollars that your city invests in housing and subsidizing housing, right? It is, you know, the incentive, the economic development that is the foundation for attracting talent. And so like that deep dive really into city administration in a nuanced way, in a complex way, I think it's something that's missing, right? You know, we have Parks and Rec, and we have Leslie Knope, and she's she's lovable and likable, but it's just kind of like, you know, she's just really passionate about, you know, Pawnee, and, you know, like, it's very low stakes. When I think that there's a reality where it's like, no, it's actually really high stakes. And when we think about, you know, the election of Donald Trump in 2016, what we also saw was that it was really local politics that provided many people with rights and protections, from being sanctuary cities, right, to signing on to the Paris Climate Agreement, to, you know, holding up promises that typically fell in the hands of the federal government. And so there's just a lot there to really think about and unpack. And even for like an exercise, think about the city that you live in. Like, who makes my decisions? Who's my mayor? How many people are council? Is it a strong mayor, strong council, weak council, strong city mayor? What's our budget, right? Like, how much money do we actually spend on housing? Oh, we don't spend any money on housing. That's why I can't find a house, right? You know, so.
Yeah, I think those questions about who, because there are many people pushing for change, but who is it that has the power in different situations to make decisions? And how does that change? And what happens when new people come in and have that position? Do things change? Do the systems change? What kind of coalitions do you need to actually change systems? Because one person or two people can't do it. I think those questions and stories are really interesting to unpack, and I think are really important as people around the country are thinking about how do we change how things are done, and that there are many levels to that. But in the end, It's going to mean different people having the ability to make decisions, and then seeing, will they do things differently when they have that opportunity? And those are big questions. We don't know how they'll turn out, but I think it's exciting to imagine how things could be different.
Very good. Kay and Nastaran, we talked a little bit about how a lot of the decisions you made were based on character, as far as having these characters taking on leadership roles. But given today's world, were there any cautions or aims in the directions that you've gone with these characters and the stories?
I mean, in terms of Resident Alien, I would say our showrunner is very much of the mind of, like, he doesn't want to make a political statement one way or another. He wants to be neutral, even though I know where he stands politically, and it's not with the right, but he really like makes a point of, like, I want to present like things as neutral as possible and let people make their own decision. I don't want to hammer like a message home. Like the whole environmental message is being done in a comedic way through an alien who's observing Earth as an objective, sort of objective observer. So that's how we really come at it on that show. I would say, like, the show that I worked on before that, Dear White People, was way more like, we made conscious decisions to do things. And I would say, I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve, because like we would do storylines that then later on would become like, this is happening. And I think that was because there was a conscious decision to make this particular group of students at this Ivy League school a microcosm for the country. So, you know, we had a lot of like activism. Basically where we stood politically came through loud and clear on that show. And I feel it's really interesting because I was on the show for the first 3 seasons. There was a 4th season. I wasn't on the 4th season because I was already on Resident Alien. But what I found out, I think I read it somewhere, or somebody told me that the show was always like critically acclaimed. You never really know from Netflix exactly how many people are watching it. But I did hear that when the you know, the Black Lives Matter protests were happening like across the country, the viewership of the show went up 400%. And at that point, the show had been on like for years and years and years. So, or at least for 3 seasons. So it had already been on. And I was like really fascinated by that, because I felt like there were new people discovering a show that was already on like 4 years before, or the first season premiered 4 years before. So, you know, I think it depends on the show that you're on and what the point of view that you wanna portray. That was definitely like a more nail on the head kind of a, like, we were very clear what we were gonna do on that show. And we were making very overt political statements, you know, whereas like on, you know, Resident Alien, it's a little bit more subverted, but we still, I think, get it out there, you know.
It's funny, Nastaran, like I remember, because in like 2020, there were so many white people who were trying to figure out what to do. There was a list that went out of things and books to read and shows to watch. And Dear White People was on that list. So I just feel like every single person who read White Fragility was like, we gotta know what to do. Like, it just like devoured Dear White People. So that's
no,
really
it's
awesome.
true. I had a lot of people say to me, oh, you know, I finally watched Dear White People. I'm like, it came on in 2016, but okay, thanks a lot.
Really funny. I mean, I think to your point, the climate sort of dictates in a lot of ways how people are going to feel about stuff. I know, like, you know, for This Is Us, in like season 2 or something, the Black family on the show went to a flashback of 2018, and there was a bumper sticker of Obama, like an Obama Biden bumper sticker on a car, and that sent shockwaves through our fan base, which is majority like people in the mid, like This Is Us was a very I don't know what people thought the show was, but it ran the gamut of like this wholesome, just sort of like American Pie kind of show for people in, you know, the Midwest to sort of feel very related to and all that stuff. And then like to have, you know, this Black family have that, we were all like, who did you think they voted for? Like we were flabbergasted, like in the room, we were like, I don't get it. Like we also wanted to tell you what time period it was. But again, it's one of those things, like we dealt with homelessness, we dealt with foster care system, we dealt with sexuality, we dealt with, you know, a political, like there was nothing that we didn't go into. And as much as we wanted to sort of feel like we were not offending anyone, we did take hard stances on things, and they were always from a character point of view. Like you have a swath of individuals who represent a swath of individuals. Be true to what those individuals' experiences were. And remember, like after, again, similar to what Nastaran was talking about with 2020, in the first episode of season 5, after George Floyd was murdered, I remember I ended up, my showrunner had written the first episode of season 5, but after that happened, he called me in to rewrite half of that first episode. And so I ended up writing the half of the Randall portion of the first episode of that season. And I included a conversation between himself and Chrissy Metz, who plays his sister. And it was one of those things, again, that everyone, you know, was sort of up in arms about because they had a very honest conversation. So it really, I mean, we handled it. We didn't feel, we always put our most our integrity forward. We stood behind what we were saying, what we were doing. We never meant to shy away from anything because they were always character first. And if they offended, they offended. If they didn't, they didn't. But it was never, I don't think we ever tried to sort of tell anyone how to vote one way or another, but we did try to say that people who are unhoused are human beings. We did try to say that this young girl who's going through, you know, an awakening is a human being. We did say all of those things have value for us. And so we're going to present them because we have a show and you don't. So that was kind of, right. Sort of like, you know, this is our platform, so we wanted to use it. So, yeah.
He used it very well. The stories just
Totally.
reach the gamut and hit on so many issues that can really touch people in their heart and also hopefully open their minds. Just so I don't forget, we are going to have a Q&A coming up. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A so we can get to them for you. And next, with Reggie, we're talking about, I think Kay said it, is being true to the characters and their journeys, their stories. So really want to talk about, you know, where these characters are coming from. And for you as a, you know, working city council member, what motivated you to get into a position like this?
Yeah, so earlier, Kay, you talked about like the hero complex and that sort of pathway, and I think that there's a real truth to that. So I'm naturally a problem solver. That's just like my orientation, how I show up, and where it drives my husband crazy because I'm always wanting to coach people on like how to do their jobs better. Like, you know, I feel very confident in doing a good job with things, right? Because like I'm a sensitive person who like listens to people, and I'm deeply empathic, and I can take on sort of people's perspective to understand solutions. So like I don't know how it didn't dawn on me earlier that I should like have gone into politics, right? Like it didn't. The way that sort of showed up for me was through dance. I'm a classical ballet dancer. So I danced when I was 3, was trained at the School of American Ballet, danced for Pennsylvania Ballet, Joffrey Ballet of Chicago, Ballet Austin. Like so I use those skills for the stage, and I taught in public high school. There was a performing arts high school, and saw firsthand how people's lives and lack of support, disinvestment in neighborhoods impacted the way the kids showed up to school. And I became very involved in their social emotional well-being, which led me to go to graduate school to get my master's degree in social work. And I became a therapist, and I was a family therapist, a marriage, family and couples therapist. And in doing that work, and I worked in community mental health, so in agencies that we took Medicare and Medicaid. Like, very rarely did our clients have private insurance if they could pay at all. And I just kept encountering the same themes: housing insecurity, lack of economic mobility, just social, just policy issues. And again, I was like, okay, well, let's solve this problem. So every step was about sort of like trying to understand like how I could help solve a problem. And I just kind of went on this sort of natural trajectory to it. Kelly, I lost the original question. Am I answering?
Yeah, you are. It's what motivated you to run for office, to get involved. So you are doing beautifully.
Yeah, and so that led me to politics. But also, there's a stat that Emily's List shares about women running for office, and the research says that women need to be asked 3 times to run for office, and before they actually really consider running for office. And interestingly enough, I kind of fell in that same stat. Like, 3 people that I respected said you should run for office. And it took someone making the case. Like, I didn't see it. I didn't, and so I think about so many other folks who would be really good in public office. Like, I thought that I would work for a think tank. I thought maybe that I would be someone's chief of staff. Like, my relationship to politics very much was like the supportive role. I didn't see it until 3 people were like, no, dude, you better run. Like, this is what you're made for. And then I learned, I did all these trainings. I did New Leaders Council. I did like 1 million political trainings, because that's my background. I'm an artist. So I like, well, what's the framework? What's the technique? What are the tools? And then I was like, oh no, I'm built for this. Oh, okay, wow. And yeah.
That's great. And I think from storytelling perspective, thinking about who are the characters, they're characters that we maybe stereotypically think, oh, that's going to be a politician. But I think, just what you're saying, there's so many people, so many characters in shows who could be the ones that step up and want to provide leadership and serve their communities. So it's fantastic the way you put that.
It's a very good point. Very good. So continuing on authenticity, and bringing that into our characters, and for the writers, have you actually in your rooms, whether actually it was working in a room or maybe on a project that you're working on your own and developing, have you used any specific resources that have been helpful, or made any outreaches in writing these characters or stories? And, if not, what kind of resources do you think could really be of help? Nastaran, if you'd start.
Yeah. I mean, we generally, what we try to do, I mean, all the rooms I worked in, there's once in a while you have to go outside of what the experience of the room is, and like consult with other people. Like, for example, on Dear White People, there was some backlash a little bit, maybe, that we had an African character, but that we didn't really serve the character well. And I remember there was a point where we actually like arranged to meet with an an African student who was going, I want to say USC or UCLA, but I don't remember now. And it was a tremendous amount of help in us, like sort of rounding out that character in the following season. On Resident Alien, we actually do, because we have a lot of Indigenous characters, and our showrunner, Chris Sheridan, is very, very devoted to making sure that everything we do on the show that has to do with all the characters, but in particular the Indigenous characters, that it's authentic. So we actually have a consultant who, he's not in the room, but he literally sort of like goes through the scripts and checks for authenticity, because we've over the last 2 seasons, we've had a few moments where, well, scenes or storylines that require, like, what exactly is the tradition here. And we also have like writers who are Native American. He absolutely insists on that, and we have them, but there are different tribes, and we want to make sure that we don't like mess it up. He's very, very sensitive about that, and he wants to make sure that we get it right. And I feel like over the years, we've gotten feedback that sort of confirms that we've been doing it the right way.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
definitely lots of consulting. And then as far as like projects that I actually did a project. If I was creating my own show, I tend to go more political, for lack of a better word. Like I created a show, or I wrote a pilot for a show for Warner Brothers that was all about a guy who wants to change things, and he decides to become a council member for his district. He's a lawyer, and he is an Iranian character, and he realizes he's being kind of used as a pawn, because like one of the clients says, well, I should have him, optically it's good for me, and he realizes he's being used as a pawn, so he decides to like throw it all out and become like run for office, like local office. And his whole attitude is, I know that you can change things more on a local level than you can to just come out and say, I'm going to become president, So that was like my own personal thing. And I did a lot of research for that, talking to a bunch of people in LA, because it took place in LA. So yes, definitely.
Okay. Very cool. Okay.
I mean, gosh, similarly. So I the first show that I did was Queen Sugar, and it was just, it's nothing but farmers, New Orleans, the South, the original American sin. We had a character who was a journalist. We had a character who became a politician. So we were just we were surrounded and steeped in everything. We talked to farmers, we talked to politicians, we talked to people on the ground. I moved to New Orleans for about 3 months, and just was sort of like there soaking up the space and the people. And that was kind of the Ava's protocol in that environment. On This Is Us, there were so many things that we tackled on the show that we were talking to people, like experts in the subject matter all the time. I think like at least once a week, there was someone coming in and walking us through something, whether it was Alzheimer's or it's, the Vietnam War. None of us were in it. So it's just we literally had people, who the things around our, we had people constantly consulting in our show, and we literally would bring them into the fold, and they would sometimes co-write episodes. So that was sort of what we did a lot. When we went down the Randall political storyline, I grew up in Philadelphia, and Randall's storyline takes place in Philadelphia. So I went to Philadelphia, and I spent time with the city councilwoman in Philadelphia, getting her information on the show. We had 2 consultants for that storyline. Whether or not we used everything that we got from the consultants, we definitely made sure that we got it. And so we get, if you're talking to like the funny thing is, like Reggie, there's a lot more character engagement with you than with typical city council people who are very much objective driven. So we would sit there and they would talk to us for hours about the policies and the way it goes, and we'd all be like, oh no. So it's just sort of like, how do we now dramatize that for our characters? Because it's important, but it's not particularly visual. So therein lies, so that would always be sort of like the thing we were navigating. But yeah, it was just, it's similar, exactly what Nastaran said. It's just sort of like, you're consistently talking to experts in the field and in the area to sort of educate the writers, and then we get the opportunity to sort of turn those truths into something that feels dramatically engaging.
And Kelly, can I just add something on
Yeah.
really quickly? So, Kay, so like, well, that's one of the reasons why I won, right? Like, in my
I get that.
like in my race, so I'm from the south side of Chicago, born and raised, moved here from Boston, danced at Pennsylvania Ballet, so I love Philly, we could talk about Philly, like lived all over. Cincinnati is a city, like the question that people ask you is like, what high school did you go to like locate you? Like that, like it is, and the area code here is 513. I have a 512 area code because my first job was in Austin, Texas. I've had the cell phone number for 20 years, and people automatically assume that I like don't know my phone number, and they correct it to 513. So there's a provincialism, right? Like it's very Cincinnati centric. My husband and I moved here 7 years ago, and I was the third highest vote getter. Our race was 35 candidates. The top 9 vote getters win. I came in number 3 behind 2 incumbents. And so, but part of that was like a new face of politics of like being engaging, not like being authentic, not just being, you know, this, I would get a lot of coaching about you use your hands too much and you code switch too much. I'm like, well, this is who I am, right? And this is how I am on a dais. Like if you watch City Cable, you know, I told someone they better secure the bag real quickly because that's just like who I am. And it turns out like folks were feeling it. And even when they're not feeling me, they're feeling that they know that I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be straight up because the Reggie that they see. And so, yeah.
And I think that's what we're excited about, that,
yeah,
you know, I was at the New Leaders Council convention where there are folks from all over the country who have similar stories and similar approaches, and hopefully, you know, that is becoming something we're seeing more and more around the country, and
yeah,
fantastic stories to tell.
Very good. We're going to get to the Q&A very shortly. So again, reminder, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please throw your questions in there. In building on what everyone was talking about here, I want to bounce back to something from that open presentation is about the resource of these, the Civic Solutions Story Library. If you could get a little more into detail about that, because it seems to be this great go-to spot to get inspiration or connection to different characters or character ideas, story ideas. There's a lot of ideas and stories on the site. Can you tell us like how you populate this, how the stories come to you, and then also if a writer engages with something, how can they go about then making that connection to maybe it's something they might want to option or explore further?
I'm so glad you asked that because I was going to ask that.
Sure.
Excellent.
No, this is great. So, I mean, we've talked to lots of writers about where they get story ideas and how they figure out how to solve different plot problems. You know, most of it's internet searches and Google and on. So we partnered with this great group called the Solutions Journalism Network. And they were founded by a group of reporters who felt like there were too many stories just about problems and how things were failing, but they didn't actually show how people were solving anything, and that was something to really dig into. And so they have a program where they train journalists all over the country and in other countries about how to analyze solutions and communities who are leaders who are trying to solve things. Again, not just to do PR for people claiming to fix something, but actually asking questions and investigating, is this actually a legitimate solution? How is this benefiting the community? So they've been doing this for a number of years. And then they have a database of over 10,000 news stories from all over the place on all sorts of topics. So we are collaborating with them, and this is something that we'll continue to build over time, but it's a search engine now where you can look on different topics, you can look by geography, and we're hoping to get more in the future where you can narrow down, types of leaders who are solving problems, different backgrounds. But we think it's a great way to look at these kinds of stories and get ideas of, oh, here's how people in these communities are trying to solve this problem. And some of them will fail, some of them won't. We can, so that's a free service. Anybody can look at that. We're wanting to share that with folks. We think it's great both for scripted and unscripted story ideas. If you're interested in connecting with a particular reporter, we're happy to connect you through the Solution Journalism Network to those reporters. And then as far as IP, this is a conversation we've been having a little bit. And because every news outlet has different IP rules about how much the reporters own, how much the outlet owns, we don't have a blanket policy on that, but we have been discussing internally different ideas for that, because we also want reporters who have spent the time and investigated these stories to get credit for that work, as there's potential for it to be shared more widely. So if you have questions or ideas, please feel free to let us know. And I hope it's a helpful resource.
It's a wonderful resource. It's excellent. So also going back to something from the presentation is where you talked about how in these leadership type of stories, police and law enforcement dominate the presence of civic leadership portrayals. It's something like 41% are done in this area. And of course, it is a natural for conflict. But in looking at new ways of telling these stories, portraying these characters outside of that law enforcement area, how do we maintain conflict if we're stepping out of these heavily used areas? There's the thought of trying to create positive portrayals. Reggie, you got I can't wait to hear from you. You got a big smile, but is that because a lot of people are like, oh, if you're trying to do a positive thing, is it going to be too nice? Is it going to be boring? I know, like, Kay, This Is Us. There's found such family conflict within it in running for office. So there are many ways to do it, but I'm really curious because I've heard feedback from people of saying, yeah, will it be too nice? Will it be boring? So Reggie, I'm going to start with you, dude.
Local politics has no lack of conflict. In fact, like it's like highly conflictual. And so I'll just like share with you sort of my biggest challenge, right? I am a fourth generation Democrat, openly gay, interracially married, like everything, like a fucking progressive like tool, like checklist, like you like check all of the boxes, right? But I'm a deep pragmatist, and I believe in actually getting shit done. And so, do you want to know who heckles me the most? Who like trolls me on Twitter, yells in my committees at me? White progressives. White progressives can't stand me. And so like there's the real conflict of like, and it's wrapped up in race, it's wrapped up in all of these things because like Cincinnati is a small C conservative city. It's changing in its demographics. Now it's a majority Democratic city, but that's in the last decade. So our constituency is broad, and I'm elected at large. So I have to represent the entire city. And so there's just this real, my dynamic is that like my Republican colleagues who consistently at the state level vote against my entire existence work with me better than people who are supposedly from my own base. And I think you can just like I can spend the whole night giving a ton of examples of how that like plays out and that sort of conflict. So yeah, that's the fundamental conflict that I sort of operate in my role.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think particularly when we talk about storylines of new leaders trying to change broken systems, there are always interests, people, groups that want to maintain those systems. So even when you have people coming in who are idealistic, who are trying to bring change, who have the right motives, there's going to be so much conflict in trying to change those systems because there always are interests that want to maintain them. And then, I mean, Charmion and I both worked in the Obama years. When you said family conflicts, that made me think of sort of internal conflicts between people who, you know, similar to what you're saying, who want to make a difference, who have the same end goal in mind, but are taking different paths there. And that can be a very challenging thing at so many levels, because you are trying to work together and at the same time can end up on different sides. So I think at all different levels, there's so many areas for conflict, and things are not simple.
And I'll just add on really quickly, Will and Charmion, so you guys will appreciate this. I said I'm from Southside Chicago. Reverend Wright, Jeremiah Wright, baptized me. I went to high school with his children. That came up, right? I'm a Whitney Young high school graduate. So, you know, Michelle Obama graduated from my high school. Like, that came up in a local race in Cincinnati from conservative people. That, you know, this thing that happened, you know, 10 years to 15 years ago with Reverend Wright had a connection. And so, like, that sort of saying what you see in sort of national politics, like, it plays up and it becomes really personal, because I'm a normal person in the world. Like, most people don't know who I am until, like, I'm in a public place and someone says my name and they're like, oh, that Reggie Harris, and it'll come out, right? And so there's a way in which, like, that conflict as a council member, you're not insulated from people airing their laundry list of grievances for you while you are literally at the gym, like happened to me this morning, you know, like fully squatting. Someone's like talking to me about you know, getting an additional parking permit for their street.
That's very funny. I'm going to use that.
Any of the writers have any thoughts, or, you know, has that come up in the room at all about making sure that we're, you know, you can't be too nice kind of thing with characters?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, I mean, actually, that's, you know, the way that we come, our show is a mixture of so many different things. It's sci-fi, it's got a murder mystery, it's got like relationships, and we walk a very fine line. You know, in the beginning, the entire thing starts off with a murder, right? So the first people that you see are, you know, the two cops sort of like investigating the murder. And I think what was really smart about the way that he did it, Chris Sheridan, the creator, did it, is that he made it more, we do actually try solve the murder, and we have them do the investigation and all that, but it's all background to the personal story between the two cops. And because it's a small town, you don't have a slew of people. I mean, you have like background actors who are like part of the town hall, but it's clearly a very small police department. So the way that we come at it is through the personal stories. And, you know, in the beginning, you know, Sheriff Mike is totally exerting his power, and, you know, Deputy Liv is meek, and she's clearly smart, but can't really get it out there, can't get him to recognize her. And they really travel like a distance with each other, because there is a point at which he realizes, you know, she quits and he realizes he needs her. All of this is happening with this murder mystery, right? But we just try to focus on their personal stories so that we can actually learn. And on all we kept asking was, but who are they? But who are they as people? Like, what did they go through? What was the, you know, and we find out in season 2 that she actually had a UFO experience when she was young, and nobody believed her, so she kept her mouth shut, and now she's decided she's going to come out with it. And, you know, we find out that he actually moved from DC to this small town. The reason he moved was because his partner was shot. So we get all that stuff, but it's always playing out in terms of just the small stories between them, the two of them, but also with the other characters. That's how we do it on that show, because it's a small town. So we always focus on the personal stories, which, happens in big towns too. I think that's the best way to tell any of these stories.
But I was just gonna say, you're hitting the nail on the head. Like Veep can go into all of the beautiful comedic nuances that Reggie, you were speaking about, right? So it's like Veep on the comedy side, or House of Cards on the drama side. Like those can go into that. But like for This Is Us, for example, it was a family ensemble, so they're not in the workplace with him. So unless the workplace with him has some sort of validity that goes back to the family, all of a sudden you just got a bunch of random people talking at your character, and you want to go see what Rebecca's doing, over there with Kate or whatever. So it's just sort of like that was our challenge. It was never that it wasn't interesting or anything like that. It was just sort of like, so wait, you're going to build a whole world of him talking to strangers? Like, our audience isn't going to know what to do. You know what I mean? They'll be like, who's Kevin sleeping with? So those are the kinds of things that we always have to toggle. So in order for us to like make the audience care, we had to create some sort of engine that brought his campaign to his home with Beth, that brought that kind of stuff at loggerheads with his identity, and he's dealing with his mom. Like he found out Rebecca has Alzheimer's at work, like, you know what I mean? So it's just sort of like we had to find ways. We gave him his daughter a boyfriend whose father was politically opposing him, so at least like the audience may care about that because they care about, like, so we had to because of the nature of our show, his world had to somehow matter to the audience in a way that the people that he was engaging with matter to the audience, because we don't have an ensemble. Like part of me is just sort of like, well, I love like a multicam comedy or even a drama where it's like in that workplace and you get to see those nuances, but it's like, we don't necessarily always work on those kinds of shows that you have the leeway to really be able to create a, you in the gym moment and someone asking that question, because it may not be reflective of the overall world of the show. And it just feels like, what is this moment?
So I think telling those stories, particularly in non-political shows where they're, as This Is Us, where it's that small line that's showing the people that may decide to serve are still normal people who are part of their communities and families. Just showing that little bit there, to me, is so powerful.
We will never stop giving people jobs. That's what we call it. It's like, make them a politician. Like, that's literally the thing. Every third season, every drama you will ever watch, someone will run for office.
What type of character will it be that does that? Yeah.
And you beautifully said that it's really these the layers with the characters, with like whether it's the crime or running for office in the background, but it's the hearts of these characters where we can dig into the drama of it or the humor of it, and both shows do it so well. Lovely. To Reggie, looking at your role as a community leader, two perspectives. What is your biggest challenge in your job, but what is also the greatest joy of your pursuit?
Oh God, that's so hard. It depends on the day. So let me start with greatest joy. It's humbling and incredible to be able to make decisions that impacts the people of Cincinnati's lives on a day-to-day basis. Like, it is, that's how I felt about being a therapist. I thought the power to assign someone a mental health diagnosis was like probably one of the biggest things that I could ever do, because a diagnosis can be liberating or it can be a burden to someone, but also, being in a position of power and and having real impact. So like that's the, I think the great joy is the responsibility of doing that. But the challenge really is is the perfect, what's the phrase? The perfect, the enemy of the good. Is incremental change more important than sweeping change? These, I think that, there are lots of stories that are centered around these tropes, but this is the thing that I think about every day, right? We're hiring a city manager, and the surges between a Black woman who was the assistant city manager and is incredibly competent and would be the second Black city manager in the history of the city, the second Black woman to be a city manager. And then a white guy who's a city solicitor, who's a known entity that has the connections. And it's this, it would mean so much to so many people, and the competing interest, and no decision is simple. And I think that that's a political side. They all have ramifications. And the hard part is really weighing, if I want to be in this position for a long time, I have to make decisions for longevity. And decisions for longevity are not always decisions that align with value set. And when do you flex? Because if you don't flex, then there's some real realities. That's the greatest challenge, is picking battles. What is the thing that I'm going to fight? Because I can't fight all of them. I can't lead on all of them. And is this the hill I'm going to die on, or is this the one that I'm going to take an L on? And that is constant. And that's stressful. That's really stressful, because it also shapes the way that I look at the city. So every time I'm out, I'm looking at our city through the lens of economic development, right? As you all are talking, I'm how why would Nastaran want to move to Cincinnati? What would our city need to be like for Nastaran to be you know what, I'm coming to Cincinnati, or for Will to relocate to Cincinnati? Really, everything starts to become, at least for me, this lens of thinking about why we retain certain people, why people stay here, why we move. And so it is, I have not mastered the separation yet. It always sort of stays with me. And then also sometimes gets me in trouble, because today, I think I almost was going to get shot because someone threw some garbage out their windows, and I cannot stand littering. And I also know that there was not a street sanitation rotation out today, so that plastic was going to be there. And I was like, why are you throwing stuff out of the window? And he didn't take too kindly to me chastising his girlfriend, but yeah, so.
For the record, I did live in Columbus. So
okay.
When my family first moved from Iran, very, very long story, but the short of it is that we lived in Columbus for 4 years. So not too far from Cincinnati.
Come on back and come down.
What a small world. Love it. We have a question from someone, and I don't open to anyone who might have an answer on this, do you have any tips or organizations to reach out to for telling stories, talking about unhoused characters and the nuances of homelessness?
I'd be happy. I don't know who that's from, but the Center for Media and Social Impact that we're part of has done some research actually on TV storylines about unhoused people, and they worked with a number of coalitions, organizations for that. So I'd be happy to share that report in those contexts. I don't know how communications works through here, but we'll find a way if the person that asked that question wants to reach out to us.
Well, there are links for all the Civic Leadership Stories projects areas that we have on the program, so they could probably, I assume, get to you through that.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
Excellent. Okay. See.
And I would just also recommend really quickly, Kelly, go volunteer, like spend time in the organ. That's the best. First of all, homeless, unhoused folk shelters, youth shelters, women there are always opportunities to do a variety of things in those spaces. Dropping off supplies is welcome. So spend time in the space. I think that just like as a person in the world, like we should all sort of make some space to do that work, but to really understand the nuances. I mean, that's where you're going to learn stories, because often those folks are invisible in many ways. And to sit across from someone who is experiencing homelessness and their humanity is often taken away. People don't talk to them. People sort of cross the street for whatever. And for them to be engaged as a full three-dimensional person happens rarely. So yeah, I would just say just go.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. I think that has really helped me when, whenever I've had the time to do that, I volunteered to go, just like serve food at Project Angel Food or, at a homeless shelter. And I try and do it often when I'm on hiatus from shows, because it's like, it helps me be outside the world of Hollywood, which is very insulated in some ways, I will admit that I have not done it during the pandemic. That was like the last time I did it was before the pandemic happened. And then I got a little bit, but it does really, it's a very, and even like politically canvassing, like that was something that like, I didn't want to do it. I forced myself to do it, and going out there and canvassing in 2018, I just remember like just talking to people. I'm like, oh, they're not so bad. A lot of people just like didn't want to talk about it. And they were like, I'm not voting for your person. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah, it's an excellent idea. And Reggie also had a comment here too. I just want to remind people of it, is that Ohio has a great film tax program. So keep that in mind as you're, coming together with your projects. Great place to film. And let's see, there's another question here. Just got to roll my screen back. Is what's the intersection of leadership and influencer culture? You guys could share any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm happy to speak through to that. I think we're examples of that on the call, right? So we have Councilmember Harris on the call with us, where we have two dynamic women, let's say that, in Hollywood who are writing This Is Us, who are writing a number of different prolific shows. And there is a confluence here because we're learning a little bit more of the truth about what happens in America. And when that can come across the screen, when it can come across the stories we're telling, we can tell more of the truth about ourselves as we're interconnecting, the more powerful we are, because we're informing the American electorate of how to behave. I can't tell you how many times I've watched This Is Us, and so many of my friends, Kay, and we have been like, oh my gosh, it's just like mind explode. Like, you have all of these different topics in one show that we've never seen in Hollywood or coming out of the West Coast before. And it's so impactful for people feeling like they are seen, whether they feel like they are identifying as overweight in the public space, or they happen to be adopted, or they happen to be thinking about running for office, or they happen to be thinking about being a teen LGBTQIA plus member of the community. There are so many things that the show speaks to that makes life real for people, right? And so when we talk about the confluence between influencers and entertainment, and I think I've gotten back to the original point, and I'll look at it again, it's just so important for the exchange of ideas, right? Which is how humanity works, how we get better, how we leverage our intellect and our gifts and our tools to create things in the world that inform who we are and drive us to be better. And Will and I are, quite frankly, on this phone, not only to just talk about sort of civic leadership projects, right? But this exchange of ideas, because it doesn't always have to come from one place. And quite frankly, it can't for us to be effective anymore. And so I think that intersection, the conversations like the ones we're having tonight, I had not met you before, council member. And so the fact that you come from the ballet stage into being a council person for the people of Cincinnati is dynamic, right? That is exactly what people need to see. Young boys and young women need to see to understand that they still matter, that their perspectives matter, and who they are deserves to be seen in the public sphere. And so I think this is a natural sphere between influencers, decision makers, and the types of things we need to be doing to move the conversation forward.
Excellent. We're getting close to the end. One last question for everyone is, great question someone has here is, as a writer, primarily for the writers, but also curious on other people's thoughts on it, is how do you creatively push through glass ceilings set by studios or networks that'll only allow the shows to advocate either political or social issues so far before you start to get pushback for being like too real or starting to make it uncomfortable for, you know, the upper level decision makers? Nastaran, you can.
Well, I mean, things have changed a lot. You know, from when I first started, there was a lot of pushback because I mostly worked in network TV, and network TV is very limited. And I think it depends on, it's kind of hard. They have a hard set of rules, and there's only so much pushback you can do. I remember before, like, for example, you know, marijuana was legal in California. I was doing a show on ABC where we had, you know, a character played by Lily Tomlin, actually. You know, she went and got some lollipops or something, and ABC just would not let us do it. And I didn't create the show, but I was running the show. And I remember I pushed back because I was like, but you let this character do this in the pilot, and now you're not letting me do it in series. And it was an establishing thing about her character. She was supposed to be like the cool grandma who's like willing to let loose and not being like her uptight daughter. And they really were like, well, we made a deal that we weren't going to do it more than once, and it was only going to be, I'm like, but this is a defining thing about the character. Like, literally, this is what the character was built on, and now you're telling. And it was a lot of back and forth. And I got them to agree for me to do it, but not on a regular basis. Like, there was a particular storyline, and, you know, there was a lot of, I just felt like that was a fight that I wanted to have, because I felt like it was such a defining thing about the character. And it's like, so you're basically taking her whole character away that we established in the pilot. Nowadays, though, I find, you know, and I've been mostly like on these cable or streaming shows, there isn't a lot that they push back on, to be honest with you. They are pretty, they let you go with it. And I mean, maybe I've just been lucky that I've been on shows where the creators are trusted by the network, that they sort of let them do things. There are, you know, there are things here and there, and we make some compromises, like because Resident Alien is a basic cable show. You know, there are certain things that, like, you know, they'll push back. They'll say, we think this is too dark. But I don't, like, even when we've made compromises, and I can't really speak for the creator, but I would say, because I've been there, like, from the first season, I would say, I don't think there was anything we did that we're just like, oh, I just hate this, they made us do this. Like, I don't feel there was anything like that. I think times have changed, and there's so much content that unless you're willing to push the envelope, you're not even gonna be able to tell interesting stories.
Good point. Okay.
I mean, similarly, so like, you know, I don't think there's anything that I think one time they were like, you know, blur out Sterling's butt. That's about it. And they never told us to do anything. We were never, there was no pushback, not one time. And again, it's to like, you know, Nastaran was saying, it's like, it's to Dan Fogelman's credit, but we were never, there was no storyline that we ever did that they ever had an issue with. Not in the 6 years, I was like, not one time. So there was, you know, I don't know if we had like an open like Trump debate. That might have been something where, you know, they might have been like, hey, what's the point here? But we never had any pushback on anything that we were doing, not once.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. You all were spectacular. Loved all these insights. I want to also give a special thanks to our subcommittee who were so helpful in bringing this together, Maria Elena Rodriguez and Robin Fusco. Also to Greg, our guild liaison, who just does so much hard work behind the scenes to help make this happen. And also the Writers Education Committee, and for everyone who came out tonight. So thank you all. Hopefully we can continue to help create change with our characters. Have a good night.
Thanks so
Have
much.
a great night, everyone.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Good night.